But first, let us turn to this week's U.S. and international headlines in a segment I like to call Who Cares? Because these things are happening over there, but why do they matter to everyday Hoosiers? So let us begin. So if you recall, late last Sunday night, President Trump issued pardons to 77 people accused of helping him try to steal the 2020 election, including New York sewer rat Rudy Giuliani, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and wackadoodle attorney Sidney Powell. This was announced by DOJ pardon czar Ed Martin, himself a January 6th planner. And speaking of pardons for J6ers, one of the 1,500 plus insurrectionists Trump pardoned on day one in January now faces charges of sexual assault and kidnapping in Utah. Only the best people, right? Also this week, on Monday, some good news for a change. The Supreme Court denied an attempt to overturn the landmark 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges case that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. The judges rejected the latest appeal by Kim Davis, a former county clerk in Kentucky. Remember her? She just won't go away. She refused to issue marriage licenses based on her religious beliefs. Many were worried, given this court's recent predilection to overturn precedent and the right's extreme Christian nationalist turn, that Obergefell was in danger, but it appears safe for now. So good news there. Also Monday, the Trump administration claimed in a court filing that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will run out of money by early 2026, and the mechanism to continue funding the organization is itself unlawful. This is the most direct attempt yet to shut down the consumer watchdog, which at this point has recovered over $21 billion for consumers who have been ripped off by lenders, but has drawn the ire of conservatives since its inception. In another court filing this week, the administration is taking aim at the hearing-impaired community, of all people, appealing a federal judge's order requiring the White House to provide sign language interpreters at press briefings. Also this week, we learned that ethics watchdogs at Fannie Mae, the government-backed mortgage financing provider, were removed from their jobs as they investigated whether administration officials had improperly accessed mortgage information of political opponents. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. And I'm just going to pause there after those U.S. headlines and ask Dee if any one of those stands out to you.
Well, sure. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they have never liked it because it's what Elizabeth Warren wanted, to protect consumers. So them not liking it is not a new thing at all. But it's an ongoing thing. And they failed to mention that maybe the reason that it's going to run out of money is because they've crippled the mechanism to bring in the money. And that could be a problem, you think?
Right.
So, as usual, it's obfuscation and big B, big S.
Yep, as is typical from this administration. Let's look internationally at a couple headlines also this week. So, in China, their carbon dioxide emissions have been flat or falling for the last 18 months, according to a piece by The Guardian. A rapid increase in wind and solar power capacity means emissions have remained flat, even though power demand is up. See, it can be done. Staying in Asia, a Monday car explosion in Delhi, which killed at least 8 people, and a Tuesday suicide bombing outside Islamabad have India and Pakistan on the brink of conflict for the second time this year. And in Palestine, Israeli settlers launched a series of arson attacks on a warehouse, a Bedouin village, and olive groves, continuing a spate of violence in the occupied territory that the UN said last month is the highest in at least 20 years. Now, IDF soldiers were there on the scene to disperse settlers and made a handful of arrests in a rare display of accountability, though it should be noted that 94% of investigations into offenses committed by Israelis against Palestinians are dropped without charges. Those couple international headlines there. Jennifer, anything stand out to you? Or if you want to go back to those U.S. headlines and pick one of those, you can too.
I don't know. You know what? There's just so much going on. I of course like the Epstein thing because it's just
we'll get there.
Ridiculous.
We will cover plenty of that, believe me.
Okay, I pass. Let's go, Tabitha. I pass to you.
Well, actually, being from a farming community, there's always a big debate about what to do with solar panels, windmills, all that sort of thing. I think that Indiana actually has a lot of people that would be considered very conservative that are very concerned about CO2 emissions. And like with a lot of other things, um, their religion is being weaponized against them, and any compassion that they may have for the environment, nature, animals, or their fellow community members would sort of be lumped into the same sort of group. Not to mention that, everybody in the West has been raised essentially to villainize everything East. So I think, just being able to at least have a conversation about people in a different country that are doing good things that we could mirror, and that it doesn't have to be us that starts it. It's a conversation worth having.
Well, I definitely don't think we'll be the one leading the way for anything environmental, at least for the next 3 years. So
certainly not. We got a lot of catching up to do, but it is encouraging to see, China, which has surpassed us as the world's top emitter, is getting on top of things before we are. So, and while they're growing, last couple things in our.
Scott,
Sorry, Dee, go ahead.
This is more than just even an environmental thing. This is a national security issue.
Sure.
If indeed they get ahead with solar and wind and other sorts of projects, and we're still stuck on a grid somewhere, which everybody knows can be disabled by any number of foreign actors, we got a problem.
Well, on kind of the same subject, I was reading in the news this morning about just our power here in Indiana going up again. Like, we were warned about this when I ran for state representative in 2024. That was one of the things we talked about a lot. And the utilities are asking to be able to make another increase. So it's just in the last couple of years has just continued to go up.
It keeps going and going and going. And, the more we get into AI and these data centers and their huge power demand, that's going to keep driving up prices. So, and we have to stay on top of that. And, we'll be covering that story from all angles here. Last couple headlines before we turn to our big stories this week. Earlier this week, Republicans on the House Rules Committee voted no on an amendment to reopen the government that would have used money Trump committed to propping up the Argentinian economy to instead of extend Affordable Care Act subsidies here at home. Senate Democrats had been holding out for an extension of these subsidies, resulting in the longest ever government shutdown. Again, we're going to discuss that plenty here shortly. On Friday, the White House announced an executive order exempting certain food imports: coffee, tea, oranges, tomatoes, tropical fruits, and cocoa, among others, from reciprocal tariffs. In the case of the arsonist playing firefighter, the administration touted this effort to bring down grocery prices, despite their trade policies being responsible for much of the inflation in the first place. And finally, in this week's briefs, the British Broadcasting Corporation issued a public apology to President Trump over a misleading edit in a documentary about January 6th, though the edit, which made it seem as though Trump explicitly called for violence on that day, does in fact constitute a serious breach of journalistic ethics. The fact remains Trump did intend for violence on that day while maintaining plausible deniability. As such, the BBC rejected a demand to pay the president $1 billion in damage, which he has been calling for. And Jennifer, any closing thoughts on those?
I hate that it happened just because it gives some power to, people saying stuff that the media does. So that's not a good look on that. I was reading this morning, I think somebody lost their job. Maybe a few people lost their job there at the BBC. I'm sure he's still going to be screaming for that money. But then I also heard on the news this morning, as I was preparing for this, that a news article that Fox had done on Trump in regard to the Epstein scandal, they had also changed an interview as well to leave out some stuff. So sure. I don't know if that's
Oh yeah, and there was the whole Fox thing with the I'll release the files.
Yeah,
that one. And we're right. It seems they only make a big deal out of it when the other side is doing it, right?